So I mentioned before, we've got some supervisors that are problematic in our state, and look, these are some examples of where they're intentionally failing to follow the law. So in 2012, we found out through one of our poll workers that the Hillsborough supervisor in 2012 trained every poll watcher to completely ignore the address on the photo ID of the voter. Right? Now the purpose, right, of the photo ID is to validate who you are. And then if I want to make sure that you're voting in the right precinct, I should be, what is your home address? Right? Well, that, you should, your driver's license by law has to get updated like within 10 days of when you move, or I think you're committing a crime. Right? It's like a misdemeanor or something like that. So it should, you should have on a driver's license. Now there's some IDs that don't have. Some of the IDs we allow in the state don't have an address. Figure that out. But on at least driver's license, you got an address there. You would think you'd be carrying. So Hillsborough was not. They actually, I've actually got it on the screen here. Here. So this is Hillsborough's. Now currently our supervisor that got elected in 2012 is 35-year law enforcement retiree, 35 years law enforcement retiree, and he was elected. Now he was second in charge when this was going on, and now he's our supervisor. Okay, and look at this on the right side, the circle. So that the left side you see the cover for the manual from 2012, and on the right side in bold red, this is the instructions for checking a voter in Hillsborough County in 2012, right? And it gets to ask the voter to sign the precinct register, but right before you do, important, do not compare the address on the voter's identification to the address printed in the precinct register, or request the voter to state, write, or confirm his or her address. That's a flagrant violation of state law. And we called them on this 6 months before they did it. And they said they'd take care of it. And then when the poll watcher came to the training material, we got on to them again. They said they'd take care of it. Early voting started. We got on to them again. And they're still doing it. I can tell you, there's a long story here. But finally, the Division of Elections got on to Hillsborough over the last 2 years to where they at least deleted this paragraph. And they started getting closer. They're really, in my opinion, they're not still doing it lawfully, but at least it's not this blatant. They've got some gray zone there where they can defend. This is indefensible, right? Now, part of what we did, we sent out an email, wanted to know how many other supervisors were doing this. Sent an email to all 67 supervisors in 2012, the summer of 2012, asking them to respond what their training was. Only half of them have responded to multiple emails. And again, we need some, if we're going to follow up on this, it's been one of the ones lower on the priority list, but if we were to follow up on this, we just need some more help. But out of the 30 to 33 that responded, 10 other supervisors were doing the same thing. So you had at least 11 supervisors in the state of Florida completely ignoring the addresses on the photo ID. Another one's registrations listing commercial addresses as a residence. There's a law that requires every supervisor to maintain a list of the valid residential street addresses in their county. Okay? Makes sense, right? And then they can validate when somebody claims this is my address, they can at least see, well, is it an empty lot, or they got a list to know whether that's a valid street address or not. Mm-hmm. Well, that list then is supposed to get submitted to the Division of Elections, all 67 supervisors to the Division of Elections, and then by the law, the Division of Elections is supposed to share it with DMV. Well, we've got a bunch of supervisors who are not maintaining their lists, okay? And I'll get ahead of myself here maybe a little bit, but one of the examples is a year ago, it's 11 months ago, December 2013, we identified 3,000 registrations statewide listing a UPS store as a residence, okay? And again, every one of those was either the supervisor didn't have this valid residential street address correct, or they had it correct and weren't running against it. They didn't have a procedure to figure out which voter registrations were invalid. So this is another area where we have the 8 supervisors. There were 29 supervisors involved in those 3,000 registrations. 21 of them have cleaned up either 100% or effectively 100%. They're like 89, 90%. But we've got 8 supervisors who haven't even started. By law, when we notified, anytime you notify, there's a law, 98.075. When you notify a supervisor as a citizen of a voter registration you think is ineligible, then that starts a 7-day clock where the supervisor has to send a certified letter to that voter to chase that lead down. So we submitted these 3,000. We got 8 supervisors who have not sent out the letters in 11 months when they're supposed to send them in 7 days. Remember what I was saying, we need some lawyers? Okay. Either lawyers or we need an army of citizens. Okay? And I may be jumping ahead. Let me tell you about here at Duval. Duval had 650 of those 3,000. 3,000? I'm getting sort of blank stares, so y'all let me know if I'm connecting or not. But Are y'all okay with your supervisor of election having 650 registrations, and when he gets notified last December, he does zilch about it for 11 months? Actually, it's worse. It's worse. You know what he did in the last 11 months? He added 100 more. Okay? Now, for me, that's a red flag. That's like, okay, if you're not doing that, what else are you not doing? And anyway. Another example here is registrations listing long-term vacancies. So everybody knows, we've got, after the housing crisis, you probably like my neighborhood, you got a lot of empty houses, right? Well, I've always looked at those empty houses, boy, I wish somebody was living there, what if I get a renter, the grass is high, I've got all those kind of concerns. Well, this past summer, somebody said to me, hey, what about the voter registrations in this empty house over by, we started looking it up. There's all kinds of abandoned registrations at these empty houses. And so another project we've started up is identify your empty houses in your neighborhood and give me the addresses. And we can look them up and tell you which addresses have voter registrations. And then we can get those submitted under that same law. That's an ineligible. If the person is not living where the voter registration says it's their residence, then that registration is ineligible. So they get sent a letter. I mean, if they've moved on, the letter can follow them and they can get their address updated like it should be, right? But if maybe it was someone who doesn't exist, maybe it wasn't a valid registration ever, right? And it's still sitting there. Another quick example, in Hillsborough, we've got dozens of 1,000-square-foot homes with 15 registrations. Well, how many of those houses do you think have 15 adults living in them, right? In 1,000 square feet. It's just another example, but in my mind, it's another area where we haven't thoroughly researched it. We've done nickel and diming on it in the neighborhoods around some of our volunteers, but my impression is that these are rental properties, and families have been moving through for years, turning over, and the register, Acorn, all these people going out and registering people who haven't voted for 40 and 50 years old, and never voted. Well, if they move, are they going to be diligent enough to keep their address up to date? That may have been the intent, right? That may have identified the people who won't keep up with their registrations so that they'll become abandoned and then we can use them, right? Exactly. So one more. Here's it's a timeline. Remember I was talking about the felons on the voter roll. So we identified in the summer, this is after the election, we identified some felons who had voted in Hillsborough. And as we started researching it, watch this scenario here. So this guy had been, this first one we found, thread to pull on, he'd been a felon for years. And he registered to vote, applied to vote in May of 2012, before the election, okay? May of 2012. Remember the process I told you? They rubber stamp them and they just add them to the roll and then they try to figure out, this is May, and by mid-June, early June, the state had identified, this guy's a felon. And so the law says you send him a 30-day notice that he has to prove that he's not a felon or he's going to get removed. Well, 30 days from June would be July, right? Well, our supervisor, the law enforcement supervisor, remember that was second in charge, now he's a supervisor, didn't do anything about that felon. He was notified by the state, but didn't follow up. They sent him the first letter giving him 30 days to respond, but didn't do anything after the 30 days expired. Until October 12th, October 10th, see it on the bullet here, number 4. October 10th of 2012, they published his name. Didn't have to by law. They published his name in the paper for another 30 days. Well, what's 30 days on October 10th? It's after the election, and the guy votes. Okay? Now, we actually were, I'm sorry, I think I misspoke a moment ago, but we actually found out about him this past January. And I submitted a public records request as to our law enforcement supervisor. When did you submit his name for investigation? I mean, he's a fraudulent voter. Oh, I forgot the last step. He voted, they got published in the paper and he voted that day. And a week later, they removed him from the voter roll because he was a felon. The week after he voted, they removed him because he was a felon from the voter roll. So then in January of this year, I'm asking, well, when did you submit his name for investigation? And the public records request came back that they submitted his name the day I submitted the public records request. So our law enforcement supervisor didn't even submit the name until a citizen found out, right? Okay. Everything we've been talking about so far is county and state level topics or legislation, but here's one that's national level. Read this number 6 with me in here. Ensure that the identity of the voter registration agency through which any particular voter is registered is not disclosed to the public. That's straight out of the federal statutes. Now, why on earth would you hide the voter registration agency for registrations they're submitting? that make sense to anybody? So, as we talk about things to talk to, your federal legislators, your senator, your representatives, put that one on your list and ask them what they're doing. They'll probably, be deer in headlights. All right, so some of the accomplishments that we've had in Hillsborough. I mentioned about the photo ID address checking, so Hillsborough has improved. We need to find out about those other 10 and the other 30 counties. We got to confirm what they're doing. We recently submitted, remember I told you the vacant homes? So we submitted in Hillsborough, we submitted 36 registrations just in it's like 10 block square area, not too far from my house. A volunteer volunteered to go around his neighborhood and identify all the empty houses. We identified 36 registrations at 18 vacant long-term. One of them still has a tarp from the hurricanes. All right? I mean, long-term vacant houses that are sitting there with 36 registrations. And our Hillsborough supervisor of elections, it's now been, I want to say 4 months. I did this in September. So it's been 4 or 5 months now, and they still have not sent out the letters. Remember I told you about the letters required in 7 days? Well, on these, the supervisor is saying, through one of his staff, that the law doesn't apply to this situation. Well, the situation, it's kindergarten English. If the voter's listed residence is not their residence, you send a letter. Well, there's no furniture, there's no power, there's no lights, there's no curtains, and there's registrations. And he's not doing anything. So, as we were doing the UPS store, that's down below here, as we were doing the UPS store work, as you're talking to people, sometimes, and some of the staff at the supervisor's office, you'll get tidbits of information. And we identified there's 3 counties in Florida, as we were pursuing this UPS store information, where they had 6,700 commercial registrations, voter registrations, that they're essentially hiding. Instead of obeying the law and cleaning it up and getting it right, they're just leaving it there, in case the voter shows up one day, right? Well, they're violating the law. The law says you clean it up. One of the supervisors says that they don't have to clean it up because it was her staff that found the errors. It was her staff that found the registrations listing a commercial address as a residence, right? So the law, again, it's kindergarten English. It says if the supervisor receives information about an ineligible address, that's good enough to be a quote, okay? Kindergarten English. If the supervisor receives information, well, they're defining supervisor as everybody that works for her, everybody in the office. So essentially, if her staff finds something wrong with the voter roll, they don't have to follow the law. Again, is anybody okay with that? Right? When they were supposed to send those letters out and they wouldn't verbally tell me how many letters they sent out in Hillsborough, he had like 118 of the UPS store registrations. Well, they gave me a quote of $56 just to tell me how many letters they sent. Right? Well, when the public records request and everything washes out, the day they were building the quote, they sent out all 118 letters. So they're sending out the letters. They've got a task, someone to the supervisor's office is tasked with sending out 118 letters of the UPS store registrations I submitted. They won't tell me verbally that they've sent none in 6 weeks. And as I submit the public records request, they start sending the letters, and then at the same time they're quoting to me how much it's going to cost for me to find out how many letters they sent. In the 2012 election, the state's own records show that they removed 1,000 felons that had voted in the 2012 general election. They removed them from the voter roll. Remember the one guy I told you about from Hillsborough? Well, there's 1,000 of those statewide. There's 1,000 felons statewide that voted in 2012 and got removed from the voter roll because they were felons in the following 60 days. And there's no way, the government's not going to do anything quick, right? Those guys didn't get convicted after the election and then get removed within like 30 or 40 days. They were known a long time ago and were going through the process of getting removed. So we've only had a couple of articles. One was on the right there, was published on the Tampa Tribune about Hillsborough, our supervisor, and the 118 UPS store registrations. And then the left one, when we published a blog about the UPS store registrations, Alan West picked up on it and was talking about it relative to his race. But one of the avenues here is for us to get more media coverage. So if y'all have connections at your, was it Jacksonville Times, is that right? What's y'all's paper? Times Union, okay. So if you got connections there, anywhere in the state, or even national, if you've got folks, like this 1,000 felons that voted, we got plenty of stories that, in my mind, merit at least state attention, if not national. Especially if folks aren't going to do anything about it. All right, so teams first started working on these felons on the voter roll. I know I'm hopping around here in the timeline. But first started working on felons on the voter roll in the summer of 2012 when we first found them. And we gave a long list, and it had a low accuracy rate, like 10 to 20%. We were green. We were still new, and it had a lot of mistakes in it. But there were, out of the list we gave them, there were 10 to 20% that we were testing accurate. And out of that list, the government's own records, the state's records show that they removed 5,000 felons from the voter roll within the 6 months after we gave them the list. And all those felons had been on there for upwards of 9 months or more. Some of them 2, 3, 5, 10 years. So they've been on the voter roll for an extended period of time, and within 6 months after we submit the list, 5,000 of them vanished from the voter roll. Now, some of them may have died, some of them may have moved out of county, but it wasn't 5,000 that died, right? Now, the state has not been open with giving us feedback on these public record status. You know, what are you accomplishing? How's it proceeding? How can we help better? And actually, in this past February, the state indicated they quit working on the 2012 list. We gave them the list in 2012, and we're trying to follow up on it, getting no feedback. They tell us that the division director of the Division of Elections told me that this past winter that they had quit working on the list. They'd done all they could. Well, we were still finding stuff, so I submitted to her. I said, well, hey, we still think there's some on the list. I said, let me give you a set of 5, or a set of 6, and then, you know, how quickly can you give us some feedback on those 6? And it was sort of like a challenge. Yeah, sure, send them in. So the next day she responds, all 6 were felons that they had missed. And so I sent her another 6, and another 6, and another 6, and another. So 5 sets of 6 were batting 28 out of 30 on the list they quit working on. Okay? And by this time, she calls it, she says, you know, what do we do about this? Because it's like, she says it's like Chinese water torture. I'm going, well, you know, let's start working the list then and give them to you 6 at a time. So one of the, I'm not sure if I'm getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, here it is. So she had said during that discussion of doing those 30, she had said the Division of Elections had improved their process, that there was a recognition of a problem in the summer of 2012, they'd improved their process, and everything was fine now, we could probably go look at something else. I said, okay, well that's fine. I hadn't rerun the numbers in 18 months, let me rerun them. I rerun the numbers, and now I've got 7,000. I've got 7,000 hits on the list between the Division of Elections and the voter roll, and it's now got a 70% accuracy. We've improved the process, and we're at 70% accuracy as we're testing these out. So that's 4,900. You know, 7,000, 70%, that's 4,900. And I give them the list, I give them 1,200 of these, and I can't get any feedback over this past spring. I can't get feedback like 6 or 8 weeks. And we're trying to get it accelerated so they get the voter roll cleaned up for no feedback whatsoever. Finally, they tell me, in this bullet you see it, she tells me that they're working through that list of 7,000 at a pace of 80 a week.
Yep.
Well, do the math. I mean, there's no way they're finished. They're not going to finish by next summer, right?
2 years.
There you go. Then there'll be a whole new crop, right? I mean, it took 18 months to get the new 7,000. You know, that was on top of the ones we gave them in 2012. So we're getting real close here. I know it's a lot of hard stuff to listen to. Ongoing projects. So True the Vote has an effort where they're working on these, what we call high registration addresses. Remember I told you we got at 1,000 square foot home with 15 registrations? That's True the Vote's project if you're interested in helping them with that. We can also do it individually. I can give you the same data to where you can work on it as a group yourself and collaborate. What we're looking for is getting groups started in as many counties as we can. And y'all have already got a group started, as I understand it, and engaged. And then we collaborate. You know, everybody's got different skill sets, every group. You know, we've got a lot of IT skill, you know, myself and a couple other guys in Hillsborough. And so we collaborate, you know, and, you know, maximize our effort, you know, for working cross county with each other. I mentioned the vacant houses. You know, you can also pay attention to rental properties and purchases, you know, relative to if somebody moves out, what happened to their voter registrations, right? We can stay on top of that in our neighborhoods, in our communities. Talk about felons on the voter rolls. We've only been looking at the state Department of Corrections. We haven't even started looking at the county or the federal list of felons yet. The jury excuses, I mentioned that. We want to start getting work on the Department of Health. We need to get a public records request in on that to find out if we can get the data about the folks that have died, you know, from Florida, and make sure they're handling the voter roll correctly there. If you all got a group here already that's working on things, an election team, you know, we can do a collaboration that way as well. If you don't mind, if you want to be informed, I'll pass around a sign-up sheet. You just give me your email address, and I can be sending you the emails that we generate. It's been very few so far, but like as we've had progress on the felons and that kind of thing, I just notify people about it and let you know the kind of work that we're still continuing to work on. And then, we can collaborate on with the election team. However we can help, each other be more successful. We're all for it.